Welcome to Todd Talk. Today we're going to talk about time travel.
Todd Talk is brought to you by time. It's a construct.
So if you know me in real life, you know that I am very opinionated about time travel. Time travel is a fascinating concept that has been utilized in many stories, and many of them are dumb. Now, that's not to say that time travel is dumb. Time travel is a really compelling idea, but a lot of movies, and some that get a lot of praise, are just dumb. So what I want to do today is first just tell you what my opinions and ideas of good time travel stories are. I want to kind of break down and tear apart some bad stories. And I want to tell you what my favorite time travel stories are. But let's start at the beginning. What is good time travel? Well, first things first, let's talk about how time works. Time works like this. It starts at the beginning and it moves forward. So for example, if it was 1950, then 10 years later it would be 1960, and 10 years later it would be 1970, etc., etc. Time moves along a timeline. Now the other thing to consider is, what is the experience of a human? So we are born, and then we age. So at the beginning I am born, and then 10 years later I'm 10 years old, and 20 years later I'm 20 years old, etc. So my life progresses from 0 to however old I end up being. Now, usually those two things kind of run in parallel. As time goes on, a person gets older. Makes perfect sense. But it gets more complicated when time travel is involved. So my opinion is time is like a book. Each page, let's say, is a year. And so if I turn the page, I go 1 year into the future, right? So let's say I was born on page 1000, and every year is a page, so I'm going forward. And let's say on year or page 1020, I come by some sort of time travel device, and I go back in time to page 800, okay? So let's say I interact with those people, and then I come back to my present time. Now here's the thing I believe. I didn't go back and rewrite anything. What happened on page 800 always happened on page 800. Because here's the thing. What happened, happened. If you traveled back in time to 1960 at some point in your life, at any point, we could go and maybe find an old photograph or something that you were already in, because that time happened already. You haven't been there yet, but that time happened. And that's the thing that rubs people a little bit. Because people like to think they go back in time and they change stuff. But the fact of the matter is this. You are one person. And there's a lot of people in the world. And not just the world, there's a lot of worlds in the galaxy and galaxies in the universe. And it's pretty egotistical to think that just because you are going to a time that happened before you were born, that all of this is going to change. You're pretty insignificant in all of this, really. Time travel works like this. You start at the beginning, and you go along, and when you get to the page 800, like we said, this person pops out of nowhere from the future. They do what they do, and then they disappear, and then time goes on some more, and then they're born, and etc. They get to a point where they go back in time. So as far as time is concerned, it goes from the front to the back. Now, from the perspective of the time traveler, they are living their life in order, 1 year after the next, after the next, after the next. But from the perspective of the rest of us, you are kind of like jumping around a little bit. And that's the thing about time travel. It's very much about perspective. From all of us, a time traveler seems to live for a little bit, and then live a little bit here, and then live a little bit here. From their perspective, it's all sequential. It's just they're doing it in different eras. But the point remains, for all of us, nothing changes. It's just the time traveler is bopping around. So the whole go back in time and kill Hitler thing, you didn't do it because it happened, right? You may have gone back in time, you may have tried, but you didn't do it. Now, the first movie I'm going to bash on a little bit is the beloved Back to the Future. Now, what would have been a great time travel story is this guy goes back in time and he causes his parents to meet, right? And then life carries on. That's a fun time travel story. But like the idea that you start to vanish from a photograph based on the probability of your existence, how the hell does that work? Like somehow time goes, it's a little less likely that you're going to be born. Hey, film, develop a little less or something. I mean, it just makes no sense. But worse is the Marty going back to his present time and somehow everybody is happier and he gets a cool truck. Like, why would anything change, right? He just went back in time, he helped his parents meet, and he returned. Time is time. Nothing changed. But they're insinuating that somehow he made their circumstances better and rewrote all of it. It's just silly, really. Now, some people like to prescribe to the multiple timeline idea. Marty went back in time, he made things better, and so he created a new timeline. So what happened in the old timeline? Marty's just gone forever? His parents are miserable because their son went back in time and never came back? And the problem with multiple timelines or this stupid multiverse idea is, as Rick and Morty have pointed out, if everything can happen, then nothing really matters. If every possible thing somehow exists simultaneously in different dimensions, then there is no stakes. There is no reward. It's just every possibility happens, and who cares? Second film I'm going to rip apart is Endgame. Piece of garbage. In Doctor Strange, he looks at all the millions of ways that things could happen, and he says there's just one way that we can defeat Thanos. So it's a multiverse, so all we did in these multiple millions of ways that it could go is just watch the one where we defeated Thanos. But that assumes that in all of these millions of other worlds, they didn't. So we just watched the one where they did, right? I mean, it's just like, who cares? There is no stakes. Did they really win? Not really. But it gets worse. The worst thing for me is when a movie says, there's rules for time travel, and then they just blatantly break them. Endgame pretends like there's some new and unique way to explain time travel, and then they just do dumb and garbagey things. So we watched the Marvel Universe happen. We watched Thanos collect all of the stones, we watched him snap his fingers, and here we are. But then somehow he ends up like getting some information that he gets killed after that, and he jumps ahead in time to do something else. So does that mean he never bothered to collect the stones? Right? He has to. We watched what he did. He can't jump ahead. It just makes no sense. And if we can just sort of, I'm just going to jump ahead, and even though I did these things that led up to this, and now I'm jumping to the future to undo it or redo something else, why don't we just keep doing that over and over? Thanos can never lose then. He'll just keep doing it over. It's just dumb. There's no stakes. There's no logic. It's just silly and stupid. I mean, what did Captain America do at the end? He went back in time to put the stones back or something, and then he decided to stay and live out with his girlfriend, I guess. And while all this miserable stuff was happening, he didn't do anything. He just laid low, or was it a different timeline? It doesn't make any goddamn sense. Now, the problem with time being a book is then people say, oh, what? I don't have any free will? And that's absolutely not true. You absolutely have free will. All of your decisions are your own. I mean, if you read a book and you look at the end of the book and then go back and continue reading, does that change the choices that the characters made in the book? No. If you read a book once and then you read it again, are their choices still the same? Yeah, I mean, they're making those choices. The part that gets goofy is if somebody from the future sees how things end up, what the result is, and then they go back in time and tell somebody, hey, I know on this day, you're going to have a job interview, you're going to drive too fast, and you're going to get in a car accident. Now that person goes, oh gosh, should I not go to my job interview? Should I not drive? Right? They second guess because this person from the future told them how it's going to end up. Now that sort of thing is rare. There's not very many time travelers, not a lot that I've run into, and their interaction with people in the past is generally not that invasive, where it's like, you need to do this or you need to do that. In those cases, though, that can be pretty disorienting. And maybe it does influence how they make their choice. But that was the case all along. It's not like suddenly we've introduced new information. That's the way it always happened. On this day, a time traveler appeared, gave you information, you made a choice, you got in a car accident, and that's how it went. And that could be super traumatic because this person told you the future or whatever, and then it happened, and that's a drag, but that's how it goes. There's a thing called the Nabokov self-consistency principle, and it is basically an idea that time travel can't create paradoxes because that's not how time works. So, like I was saying, if you go on time machine back to kill Hitler, obviously you didn't, because I can tell you that Hitler didn't get assassinated as far as we know. If you went back in time to prevent the Kennedy assassination, you didn't do it because I can look in a book and see that that still happened. So while you were there, because that time has already passed, maybe you haven't gone yet, but when you did, you didn't do anything. That's how time travel works. Now, paradoxes are a fun thing. As an example, let's say I take the book Hamlet and I travel back in time and I find Shakespeare and I hand it to him and he reads it and goes, that's really good. And he writes it down and publishes it. Go through time till I'm born. I take the book Hamlet. I go back in time and I hand it to Shakespeare. Where did the story come from then? Who wrote it originally? That kind of stuff is fun because it creates things out of nowhere. It is simply a artifact of time travel. If when I was a boy, an older version of myself appeared out of thin air and handed me a stopwatch, and then I hold on to this stopwatch until I get older, and I go back in time and I give the stopwatch to younger me, how long is that stopwatch going to last before it wears down, right? It feels like it is having a longer existence than it should. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe inadvertently somebody swaps out the stopwatch sometime during my life and I just don't understand that it happened and it is actually being replaced. Again, that self-consistency principle is a pretty strong thing. Another fun thing is the idea of a tangent universe. So let's say I go back in time and I kill my grandfather. Obviously, grandfather would never have parent, parent would never have me, nobody to go back in time to kill grandparent. So how does that play out? From a storytelling point of view, I very well might experience that. I might experience the going back in time and murdering somebody and then coming back to my time and realizing nothing changed. It's like that little tangent sort of played itself out and went, nope, that can't happen. And those types of things are some of my favorite time travel stories. One of the worst time travel stories, in my opinion, and it is reviewed so well and so many people like this movie, is Looper. Rian Johnson does so much good stuff, but this was so inexcusable. The idea is it's about these hitmen where they will kind of stand in a point where somebody will time travel in front of them, then they kill them. And it's a really clever crime because if you're doing it through time travel, you can hide the evidence really easily. Eventually, there will come a day where somebody will appear in front of you and you will kill them, and then you will realize, oh, that is old me. And attached to old them will be a payout of a bunch of gold. And that's when you know you're retired. And you get to live out your days with all of this gold until the moment that somebody takes you, sends you back in time to be murdered, and they call that closing your loop. But then it goes and just breaks all of its own rules. The Bruce Willis character one day has old him appear and he shoots him and he takes his gold and he lives out his days and he falls in love. and then his wife gets murdered. And so what he does is he goes back in time and prevents himself from being murdered, and he runs. And he's going to try to prevent this from all happening in some way. Now, the problem, of course, is if he runs and he never got murdered, he never met the wife, he never fell in love. So we've already, gone off the rails. Later on, we find out that young him knows this woman, and her child becomes the head of this crime organization. And so old him is trying to kill the child. And then they're somehow saying that because the mother gets killed, the child ends up growing up into this evil person. But it's well, wait a minute. He would have never murdered her because he fell in love and had a wife. Where is this story even coming from? And then young him decides, oh, I need to stop all this, and he kills himself, which makes old him disappear. Which is wait a minute, old him killed old him already, and why would killing young him make old him disappear? Because they're not even the same person anymore, because this one fell in love with a woman, and it doesn't make any goddamn sense. Another stupid thing that happens is there's a character who sees his old self and freezes and decides not to kill his old self. Old self runs. And so then the crime organization takes young self and starts cutting off his fingers and all of defacing him and that kind of thing. And so old him starts missing fingers, and they start carving messages into his arm. And eventually old self is a shell of a person, and he runs into one of the crime organization and they kill him. But then you're wait a second, they just cut up young him. So when young him gets old and then gets sent back, he's not going to be able to run. How the hell does that work? If he doesn't run, then why did we bother to cut up young guy? And it's just stupid. It doesn't make any sense. And like I said, that's the thing. If your rules don't make any sense, there is no gravity, there's no weight, there's no stakes. It's just a fairy tale. It's just a silly, fluffy fairy tale. Now, that being said, there are some fantastic time travel movies. One of the very, very best is The Terminator. Terminator is a really, really great time travel story. You've got a woman who's being chased by a robot from the future because she gives birth to the leader of the human resistance when the robots take over. In the future, the leader sends back this guy, Kyle Reese, to watch over his mother. The mother and Kyle fall in love. They get together, and the child they create is that future leader. It was naive of the robots to think they could change anything. In fact, they created their own problem, and that is the magic of time travel. Time travel stories invariably are tragic. It is very much the idea that we can't change anything, or we are the authors of our own problems. Terminator 2 is a pretty fun movie, but it's questionable as far as time travel goes. Because let's imagine this. It's the future. I'm a robot, and I go, we need to stop this John Connor character. I know, let's send a robot back to the past to kill his mother. Okay. Did it work? Let's send another robot back to the past and see if we can kill him. How much time passed between those two robots? Were they sitting there and going, I don't think anything changed, man. Let's send another one? And why did they send it 10 years later? Why didn't they just send it immediately after? You know what I mean? That second movie kind of breaks the time travel thing. Another great time travel story, Donnie Darko. The wonderful thing about Donnie Darko is it doesn't explain the science. There is a director's cut that tries to add more to it, but it just gets in the way, and it doesn't really make any sense anyway. But the wonderful thing about Donnie Darko is it is about a kid, and something weird happens, that he narrowly avoids, but shouldn't have avoided. So he has a certain amount of time before his tangent closes. And during this time, he gets to experience and do a lot of really cool things. But the loop closes, and what was supposed to happen happens, and then time goes on. And it's sad and it's tragic, but that loop that we get to experience, that going back in time and killing your grandfather moment, is a really exciting thing and really kind of cool and well done. It's very moody, and like I said, it's kind of mystical as far as how the time travel is happening. Very surreal and kind of weird, which I think is a neat thing too. It's kind of fun when it is happening to you and you don't completely understand the time machine element. One of the most original time travel stories I've ever seen is Christopher Nolan's Tenet. You know, as far as a story, it's pretty much just an action movie. As far as characters, I mean, the main character's name is the protagonist. But as far as a practical examination of time travel, I think it's a really unique take and a pretty interesting watch. One of the most ambitious and incredible time travel stories I've ever run into is the Netflix series Dark. It's 3 seasons, it takes place over several generations, and it is absolutely astounding on a lot of different levels. The story is very good. The casting is incredible. There are people who we see as a child, as an adult, and as an older adult, and they look like the same person over time. The actors they chose were incredible. And it explores time travel on a lot of different levels. Again, there's a little bit of a weird mystic element that we don't completely understand, which makes it sort of believable. Ultimately, it's a very tragic tangent situation again, where once somebody figures out that this is not the way it's supposed to be, it all comes unraveled, but the journey to get there is so worthwhile. Another time travel story that I'm a big fan of is Lost. The biggest problem with Lost is that it was told over 7 years, and that's a lot of information to keep in your head. A lot of people found it really confusing, really difficult to follow, and man, that is a long time to tell a story. But as far as time travel goes, it was really smart, and the characters in the story really questioned it. You know, can we change what happened? There were characters who were like, you know, what happened, happened, and we can't change that. And then there were others who were like, time is kind of like a stream, and if you throw a pebble in, nothing's going to happen. But if we can throw a boulder in, maybe we can change it. And ultimately, when they tried to change it, they created the thing that brought them to the island. It was clever. It was really well done. So that's sort of my 2 cents on time travel. I think that a clear timeline with clear stakes and a clear reward is the best way to tell a story. The whole multiverse, multi-timeline thing, while maybe scientifically plausible, often makes for a bad story. Again, if anything is possible, then nothing matters. Like I said, Rick and Morty, great story about a multiverse, and they really play that out. You know, there's an episode where he mutates his family into these horrible monsters, so he just goes to a different universe and lives with a different family, because there's millions of versions of them, so who cares? Another great story about multiple timelines was a Netflix series called The OA. Had nothing to do with time travel, but everything to do with timelines. And it can be a cool concept, but like what Marvel is doing with it, pretty dumb. I feel like their whole thing is, oh, there's that guy from that thing, or cool, we get to kill him again. It's just bad storytelling. There are a lot of really great time travel stories out there. Leave me a comment. Let me know which ones are your favorite. Let me know what you think about my ideas, and I'll see you in the next one.